Hi, welcome to Nightchild Reviews. I've been intrigued by the author Scott Woods ever since I first saw him discuss Prince on Twitter, and in particular his recent comments regarding the Sign of the Times DVD issues relating to more accurate representation of Prince's legacy and race. His book, Prince and Little Weird Black Boy Gods, is genuinely not really like any Prince book I've previously read, and I've read quite a few. The first thing to make clear is that if you're looking for a book that details Prince's life story or album releases and discusses everything in a strict chronological order, this is not that book. There are many other books that fulfill the career trajectory and life story of Prince. There will probably be many more. This book is something much more than that. Essentially a collection of essays, thoughts, lists, vignettes, reviews and discussions. It really caught me off guard. In quite an unexpected way, it gave me more comfort than any Prince book I've read so far. It's not instantly easy to say why this is. It may be because Scott clearly connects with the Prince in a way that he likens to a friend who is just really bad at staying in touch with you and doesn't answer your emails. And yet a friend that ultimately was utterly key to shaping your growth and experiences in life. Scott describes his intentions succinctly and with trademark directness in the introduction, where he notes that I've read most books written about Prince, and I can tell you that, with very few exceptions, most of them suck. This book will certainly suck to someone else, and mostly for the same reasons as most Prince books suck. It won't tell you anything about Prince that you didn't know. The difference with this book is that it isn't a book of rehashed Prince anecdotes passing itself off as a tell-all. This is a book of fan anecdotes, attempting to unpack the relationship between a star and a fan. The book is described as a series of conversations between Scott and Prince, and like all relationships with true friends, sometimes it's praising, sometimes admonishing, sometimes frank and candid. Scott mentions in the introduction how some people danced, some people played their instruments harder. Scott wrote, all were trying to connect with their friend, Prince. Scott loves words and is fascinated by them in much the same way that Prince was with music. He makes you view the ordinary in ways that both make sense and yet have never been expressed in quite the same way before. I have to say one of the book's strengths is that the essays shoot off into so many different emotional areas. There are the hilarious items such as the brilliant things I am reasonably sure Prince has never done, a funny and left field list of items Scott imagines being totally alien to Prince. There is the controversial comparison discussions where Scott brings his mathematical Prince nerdiness to topics such as 10 ways Kanye is not Prince, and the social media obsession with Michael Jackson versus Prince. Who is the best? This question, Scott admits, is impossible. As to quote him, the question always bothered me. I liked them both, but thought them different enough to make any question of who's the best seem inadequate. It's like comparing apples to high-heeled boots. There are also the discussions about race and Prince's black identity, where it is clear that Scott is truly a force to be reckoned with. His clarity, logic and compellingly constructed arguments are evidence of a true mind at work. Two essays of note are entitled Prince and Little Weird Black Boy Gods, which chronicles flashpoint memories in Scott's life where Prince's influence was the whispering voice in his ear, and the truly stunning article Reclaiming the Black Prince. I have to say that Reclaiming the Black Prince has been on my mind most as the recent controversy over the Sign of the Times DVD documentary really brought the issue into sharp focus, or at least it did for me. And that there is perhaps the telling part. It had not occurred to me, for example, that as Scott points out, and I quote, prior to the internet, most of what we knew of Prince came from print sources, magazine articles, choice interviews, a dozen or so books of varying quality, and much of it draws from the same pool of people. And then Scott makes the point that, and again I quote, the thing that eventually stood out to me as a black writer and fan was something that is rarely discussed, or rather poorly debated, that Prince scholarship is a canon largely written and maintained by white people. The issue isn't whether or not this is true. The issue is why this is occasionally a problem. Now here is where I, that is the Nightchild, feel I need to make a few brief but very important points. I'm still terrified about discussing race and have fully accepted that some people will fundamentally disagree, and that may impact my channel. I am now at a point where that matters a great deal less to me than what I can potentially learn from having this conversation. I must be fully honest that I feel the only way to approach this issue is as one of a willing student, confident enough to acknowledge my unconscious biases and ignorance, without intellectually fleeing the scene and refusing to acknowledge that there is a debate to be had at all. The point is that I can be fairly sure that a number of people's internal dialogues right now are saying something along the lines of, why is this about race? Prince didn't care about race. And the most problematic line, that Prince somehow overcame or transcended race. I would simply ask that you do two things for me. Firstly, listen to the Muse to the Pharaoh podcast via the link below, entitled Dear White People. Let me be clear, it is not an attack, and I totally understand why people might initially react this way. Being brutally honest, I was once one of them. I felt, well, defensive, misunderstood, slighted, but also something more uneasy and complicated. I said to myself, well, I haven't said racist words. I haven't racially abused anyone. I'm not part of the problem. I'm not doing anything. I repeated those words. I'm not doing anything. I listened to the experiences expressed by the Muse to the Pharaoh podcast, which at times can be quite emotional, and how race was utterly indivisible from Prince, and how much his race impacted and informed his life and views. I then listened to the stories of police interaction, code switching, opportunities denied, and talent society has wasted. I have to be clear, if the police were called on me without reason, if I had to adopt a different way of speaking in certain situations, if I was told that certain careers weren't commensurate with my race, I would be talking about race a lot. I probably wouldn't stop. But the truth is, at least racially, where I live in the UK, well, I have the privilege of not talking about race if I don't wish to. I pretty much have it made. Being white has never denied me an opportunity. I also have the secondary aspect of being male, but that's a whole other story. I can honestly go years without considering race. I have that privilege. But do you know what? I was missing out, hugely, when it came to Prince, this otherworldly being whom I had followed since I was 14. Except, of course, he wasn't otherworldly. He didn't appear from nowhere. He was moulded and shaped by his personal context. As Scott articulates better than I ever could, applying a cultural context that accounts for Prince's race as a matter of course, and not a footnote, or worse, irrelevant, broadens our ability to appreciate and interpret his music, as well as piece together a more interesting, honest and complete picture of his history, ideas and values. Contextualising Prince as black does not undermine his image or genius. It expands those things. Some have argued that no one denies Prince's blackness, and yet the quotes used by Muse to the Pharaoh, garnered from social media recently, extol a different story. I read a tweet by Scott Woods where he referenced white people, and the phrase really hit me, and we had a really, I think, engaging and certainly to me enlightening conversation. I've included the link below. Please take a moment to read that thread. I know talking about these issues is difficult, but I liken it to having an honest and open conversation with a close friend about something problematic. It feels awkward and terrifying, but there is something ultimately gained by the process that, whilst it obviously won't solve every problem, leaves everyone with a slightly better understanding of what it's like to experience the world through another's eyes. There is no appropriate segue to move on to the other essays in the book, so I'll just dive in. I adore the essay where Scott visits Paisley Park. He is absolutely correct when he writes that all Prince fans had a secret, or not so secret, desire to visit Prince's creative powerhouse. And then in April 2016, to quote Scott, there was no more need for the secret. Rather, there was no longer a path towards realising it. A million bucket lists suddenly made confetti run through a million heart-shaped shredders. Scott details his time at Paisley with ways the tour can be improved, the experience heightened, and it is warming to see that some of these ideas have certainly been implemented since this was written. Scott, like all of us Prince devotees, also plays the game we all play, called If I Were Prince's Label, what albums would I release, with some interesting ideas. There was also an absolute nerd heaven analysis of Prince's sidestick, his iconic sound which once you hear it, you know it every time. One of the most difficult essays was where albums that Scott didn't really appreciate the first time around were revisited, and whilst I love this book, Scott and I disagree here quite a lot, but that is in a way the joy of it. My mind was racing in defence of Lotus Flower and MPLS Sound, which I'm going to pipe into Scott's world in a valiant attempt to change his mind. I feel he's weakening on his initial dislike of the Rainbow Children, so I'm fairly confident we can convert him there. Scott also mentions the one cover that another artist made better than Prince's original, and it was not 5 Women, so we'll be having words about that. There is a real poignancy With the essay dealing with Prince's final tour, there is an emotionally fused exploration of a few key moments in particular that encapsulate so much pain, tragedy and reflection. For me, the laugh out loud moments are when Scott describes his first listen to an album routine which sounded eerily familiar. Even the motivational motif of Prince toiling away in Paisley Park, pushing Scott to create more, really hit home, as did the notion that perhaps Prince's mysteriousness was that he simply always had better things to do, new ideas to nurture. There is so much more in this book which is somehow disconcertingly packed into 141 pages, but I want to leave you with the essay entitled The Future of Prince. It is something that is on many people's minds and we all have our own thoughts, ranging from locking ourselves away with his music to more grandiose plans. Here, Scott is clear. The future of Prince will lie in the hands of people who aren't hardcore fans. Scott states that the only limit here is the imagination of the estate in what they release, but warns us that Prince's legacy isn't a given. Prince could, without mindful, empathetic and open-minded fans, go the way of the great musicians of the CD rack at gas stations everywhere, ubiquitous but not present. I would very much like to think that the entire Prince community will not let that happen. Prince is too important in so many ways to not receive the very highest and best treatment. In conclusion, I can honestly say that in many ways getting this access to Scott's mind was like talking to a really passionate Prince fan who also just happens to be a superb writer, succinct and challenging thinker, and way smarter than me. And he's funny. And poignant. It's not really fair, but I still like him. Prince and Little Weird Black Boy Gods is not a typical book, but all the more better for it. Links for purchase and Scott's website are below. Tell him I said hi, and that he's wrong about Lotus Flower. No more candy for him, unless it's a chocolate box featuring Q-Tip.
Every once in a while, you need some old school